Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the DCL Show, your source for Disney cruise news and reviews. Coming to you from the Bob Varley Studio in Orlando, Florida, I'm your host, Pete Werner, joined this week by my good friends John Sicari.
Hello.
Rhino Clavin.
Hello.
Via Skype, Miss Elaine Edwards.
Hi, Vince.
And our producer, Mr. Craig Williams.
No, hoy, hoy.
And just a reminder, this show, along with all the content we produce, brought to you by DreamsUnlimitedTravel.com. And if you like our content and you want to get up to $1,000 in a shipboard credit on your next Disney Cruise Line vacation, please check out DreamsUnlimitedTravel.com and show your support. All right, this week we are continuing our discussions of our trip to Alaska, and we are going to talk about Skagway. The port of Skagway. Mm-hmm. And everyone except me did excursions. I did jewelry shopping, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But, John, what did you do?
Jackie and I went on a street tour, and it's like a 1920s bus vehicle type thing with a hooga horn. I don't know why that stood out to me, but it was a hooga horn that she used a lot. And there was a lady dressed in like 1920s attire, and she took us on a tour and told us all about the town, and most of it was how small the town was, how it's never burned down, so it kind of retained its old westerny feel, and that if you redo a building, you must do it off of a photo of the way it was when it was first built.
Interesting.
So the more modern it gets, technically the more nostalgic it still becomes, because you can't change it. So I thought that was cool. It was really interesting. It was nice. They took us to a graveyard and told us about the hero and the villain of the town, how there's no doctor in the town. There's no doctor. There's a nurse practitioner. That's it. Anything else, you have to get a $30,000 helicopter airlift to go out of there. Amazon Prime, I think, is 2 weeks to get there.
Good Lord.
Yeah, and then there's only like 2 grocery stores. An avocado is like $8, and a lot of times it's better for them to drive to Canada and go shopping. But then there's so many rules and regulations about what you can bring back into the country. But again, interesting little town, cute. I liked.
Yeah, because
how much was the excursion? Do you remember?
I'm gonna say 56. I'm probably off by a little bit, but it's close to that. It wasn't expensive.
Okay.
yeah, Skagway is the furthest north you will go in terms of the excursion. So as we've talked about on our full review of the Alaskan cruise, you sail up the Inside Passage in the first days of your cruise, and then you go all the way up to Skagway, and then you basically come back down. And that's how you make your entire journey. So Skagway, you're furthest north, just about, I would say, maybe 45 minutes to an hour driving. You reach the Canadian border, and at that point, that will take you into the Yukon territory. And it's very, very remote, because Skagway is a town that was basically founded around gold mining. And unfortunately, there was not really any actual gold or riches to be found in that area. But it has that rustic charm because of it, as Panda described. It feels like you would still see a drunk prospector walking around on the streets, and you would be like, I don't know if this was a guy the cruise ships paid for, or if it's a true local.
Big bad Bart going into the saloon with the 2 swinging doors,
Well, they did have the gentleman's house that the ladies were hanging out the windows and screaming down to us. They wanted Rhino to go in, and
they were very interested in me for some reason. Because I was taking a picture of like a building with a mountain behind it. She's like, "Why are you taking a picture of that? There's something much more attractive up here." And I was like, "Oh God, no!"
Barking up the wrong tree, lady.
Yeah, really.
Was that at the Red Onion?
No, it was at the other whorehouse down the street.
I just wondered because the Red Onion was part of my excursion. So
yeah, no, it was actually at a different one. It's a wild place, but I think this one, to me, there's something about it that has that Alaska feel. We'll get into Juneau and Ketchikan later, but Juneau is very much the it's very much the capital of Alaska, so it has a city feel to it, and then there's more to explore beyond it. Ketchikan is very wooded and feels very nature heavy, but Skagway, something about it, it feels like an old mining town that like we kind of know from Disney parks, even in like a frontier way. So I just it's weird how the ships pull up. They have ports all the way down at the end, and it's a bit of a hike to get into the downtown area. Not very long, I think 10 minutes, but it's not like you get off and you're right there. But if you do one of the train excursions that are available, they are literally there waiting for you as soon as you get down off the ship, and you board, and then you go off and away. So, and then they'll drop you off back downtown later if you want to. So it's an interesting way to get around.
If Pecos Bill was on the street, you wouldn't think twice that it would fit right in.
It definitely felt like, I kept saying to Craig, where it feels like we're on the back lot of a movie. Like Universal Studios Hollywood,
felt
or
that.
you said Frontierland, something like that, where you're like, nothing feels quite like fully, where you're like, these are just facades, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It was interesting.
Yeah. Because the town itself, it does have that fake look to it, but it's very real, and it's settled right in this giant canyon. And so then you have mountains on both sides of you, especially if you start taking the train and going up deeper in towards the Yukon Territory and such, or drive up that way. It is such a unique location, and it is truly hard to understand it unless you go there. And you're getting there by either a ship, driving through the wilderness of Canada, or we saw some small planes that flew into their airport, but you don't have a lot of options to get into Skagway very easily. So definitely by a cruise, like a Disney cruise, is a great way to see this city that's just kind of stuck in a very strange place in time.
It must look very different when the cruisers are not there. It's got to be quiet.
Beyond the cruise year, I've talked to a lot of the people who work there. A lot fly in specifically for cruise season, and they will be there for that time period and work and make money, and then they will head back down to the lower 48 and work and go about their lives. But yeah, they just come up specifically because one of the guy that I think was our narrator on our train ride, he was like a PhD student or something along those levels, that he just figured he'd take a season to come up and, do something different and learn about a different culture. And then he's going back down and going about his ways, whatever he would do normally. So
our tour bus driver was talking a lot about the city and the people that live in the city and the life there and that kind of thing, because she does live there. And she said 800 people that are actually there year round. And she talked about how when it gets into the winter, and so it's more dark than light throughout the day, they try to do a lot of community events and to really just make sure that people are actually leaving their houses and getting out and that kind of thing. And the whole theme is that if you come, you have to bring a neighbor with you, because they really try to sustain some sort of life when it's not cruise season, because their entire town is basically revolving around cruise season.
It's worth mentioning, Craig, there is a Patreon video for the $10 tier and up that a lot of us are doing for the Alaska, but specifically the one that I did with Jackie and I. You kind of go on the tour a little bit. It's a little bit of fun if you're on there. Go check it out.
And that's patreon.com/disunplugged if you want to sign up for Patreon. In fact, in the $25 and up tier, they're watching us live right now as we record these. Some of the things we do, extra content for our Patreon supporters. And what did you do, Rhino?
I was on the train that that Craig had mentioned, that started in the town, and it took you up the Yukon, the pass, all the way.
White Pass.
Yeah. What do you remember the name of the railway?
It's the Yukon. Sorry,
White
let me
Pass.
get it's the White Pass Scenic Railway that takes you up the White Pass, and the White Pass is where the miners, how they would travel to get down into that area and
Yeah.
such. So it follows along that same pathway, and the train just keeps going and going and going. I know the furthest I've seen it to go to is Carcross, but that's in Canada right now. The train is not running into Canada, so you
We
just
went
kind
into
of do.
Canada.
We went
Canada.
into Canada for about 10 seconds and looped around and came back into
Yeah.
the United States because you had to get back.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this was, I think it was like 3 hours from beginning to end, like an hour and a half up, hour and a half back down, around there. It was incredible for me. I mean, it's an older style. I don't know the type of train, but it's, it's 2 seats on either side and you look out the window. But they also said once we were out of the town, we could go stand on the platforms on either side outside. So I literally just went out and stood on the platform like the entire time. But it was like, you'd just be like in these wooded mountain areas, and then all of a sudden you've gone over a bridge over like a ravine that you're just like, it's like, hundreds of feet down, and it was just like the most like breathtaking views everywhere. And I love being on the train because it reminded me of being a kid again. So because that's how we stood on the train at Edaville. But so I loved this, and I thought the views were just were incredible. I know that Craig has different feelings on it than I did, but for me, it was a borderline spiritual experience to be able to be in this beautiful place, standing on a train like this type of specific train that I grew up crawling around on. That it was kind of just like, I don't know. It's one of those moments where I was like, I wish I could pull my grandparents out of Massachusetts and put my grandfather right next to me on that thing there. But
There's something cool about riding a train in that kind of setting. I will give it that. And if you think you're going to do multiple Alaskan cruises and come to Skagway multiple times, I would say maybe on your first one, do this. But the problem with the train is we did an adult only departure, which meant we were in with all families and stuff, but our cabin specifically was adults only. And so we didn't have to worry about, kids running up and down, screaming, anything like that. The narrator was in our car knowing that it's all adults, so it'd be a little bit quieter. And it was $10 more for a ticket to do it that way, which if you're going to do that and you're only with adults, I would absolutely say do it that way. But the problem is going up the train route, and I think Elaine will attest with me on this too. It's like Tree City. All you're doing is looking at trees, and then it will open up for a second, and you have this gorgeous, gorgeous view. But then it's back to trees. So I felt like for 3 hours, I probably was staring at trees for about 2.5 hours of it. And I didn't get the scenic part out of it as much. Whereas I've talked about before, I've driven twice now on the opposite side of the canyon up into Canada and around. You don't have any obstructions blocking you the entire way. You don't have the train running constantly, so you can park your car and stop and look at whatever you want to.
I don't know. Rhino's running a video.
Yeah, Rhino's showing
Right
you
now.
the good parts. He's not showing you the parts where you're just staring at trees for a long time. And the ultimate kicker with it is the adult only departure was $160 per ticket.
Wow, that's a lot.
The other ticket with, family ticket, that was $150. And so for Rhino and I, it was $320 total for the round trip train ride. For $350, we could have rented a Jeep and driven all the way up ourselves and stopped as much as we wanted. And, a Jeep, you're going to fit 4 or 5 people in there. 5 uncomfortably, 4 for sure. So if you have multiple people, I would not recommend the train. I would get a car. Just my opinion, though.
for me, I think it's something where like if we went back, I would definitely like to do what you talked about in terms of like the car. But I'm happy I did the train. Like I think it was kind of like a once in a lifetime experience to be able to do that. But yeah, I mean, you can definitely set your own pace and stop and do the photos and pictures if that's what you're interested in. I guess it depends how hands-on, how much detachment you want from the actual like visit to the experience that you're having, because you have to be a lot more active in terms of having to like rent the car, get in the car, choosing where to stop, getting out, whereas this is like a guided tour and somebody's telling you what you need to know and you're just along for the ride sort of a thing.
Yeah, but I'd rather have hours of a scenic highway and being able to see stuff rather than just looking at tree trunks as it's passing by and not being able to see what's on the other side of the trees.
Now, did Elaine go with you on the train?
No, but she did a full the Best of Skagway, I think maybe was the one that she did. So the train was part of it. So she also has train experience. She'll be the third opinion. We'll see who wins this.
She'll be the caboose here.
Okay, that's awful.
So Elaine, talk about your excursion.
Okay, so mine was called the Best of Skagway. And when I was looking through and I was kind of trying to see, what am I going to do? There's all these things that you can do. And a lot of the different ports have a lot of the same Alaska experiences where they have a salmon bake or they have gold panning or they have this train and, historical stuff and all that stuff. This was all of that in one excursion. And I thought it was fantastic. It was $309. However, when Craig said his was, almost 170 and mine was 7 hours long and the train was only one small part of it, like this is actually, if you had booked all of this separately, you would have, this is a very actually good deal when you think about all of the things that are included into it. It is for ages 16 and older, so there was no kids. There wasn't even any teenagers on mine. And I would say there was less than 20 people in our group. So what happened is they picked us up. They didn't pick us up until noon on that day. So at that point, I think Craig and Rhino had already gone out and come back on theirs. But so I just hung out on the ship in the morning and did some more like onboard activities. So they picked me up at noon. It was a full like tour bus. They went through the town and she did all kinds of historical stuff. So it was a lot of what Panda and Jackie experienced. When Jackie was telling me all of these facts about the town, it was all the exact same stuff that this guide had told us. So I got their experience. And then we got to the train, which was, 10 minutes away or less. And we had the 3-hour train ride. And I was kind of unsure about it because for me, being on the train for 3 hours, when I had my preconceived notion of I've done historical train rides before, and I was like, oh, it's going to be 3 hours. Like I could handle an hour, maybe, 3 hours seems a little bit much. However, they did a really good job they were talking through almost the entire time of, this is what's happening. They had a map that actually showed you each mile marker, what was going to be happening. What was coming up, so you kind of knew where you were, and along with the stories that they were telling of the entire Gold Rush experience. And as Craig said, I was also a little off put by they would say, okay, here's where this thing is, but you couldn't see it because there was a lot of trees, and you would get like 2 seconds where it would pass by. When we got on board, they said, there's no better side. You can sit on the left side or the right side. It doesn't matter. However, I will tell you, if you are going to do the White Pass train, whether through my experience or through, booking just the train, sit on the left side.
Yeah.
Because the left side is when you are going through the whole track for the first time. So they're narrating it. They're pointing all these things out and you're seeing it. Whereas you get halfway up, you turn around, you come back down, you're going by the same stuff again. That's why they said, don't worry, right side people, you'll see it when you come down, but you're not hearing the stories at the same time you're seeing it. And it seemed like it went by a lot faster. I think they were coming down a lot faster. So sit on the left side. It's just better that way. So that was good, as they already talked about the training experience. So when we got back, we got off the train, we got back on the bus, they took us to Liarsville and told us the story of Liarsville. And this was a whole like Gold Rush panning community. And they had an entire like representation set up and all of these actors. And this is basically the reason it's called Liarsville is because this is where all of the like newspaper press reporters would stay. and how they would basically just sit there and collect people's stories and make up all of these tall tales that's what they would submit to their newspapers rather than actually going gold panning. So they had a bonfire there so you could roast s'mores. They had apple cider, they had cookies, and then they did this little playlet. It was about 10 minutes, and it was, this humorous thing. And all of the actors were they were all funny. They were all playing up to, I was attempting to vlog the whole time. They were playing up to me recording them, and they were talking to you, having conversations. And then they told you about gold panning and how to do it. And then we gold panned. So I have my very small little baggie of my 5 flakes of gold that I found and brought home with me. And then they took us kind of across the way, and they had a salmon bake. And this was a full meal. They had salmon, they had chicken, they had like 10 sides, salad, multiple desserts, and they had a gentleman that was playing guitar and singing while you were sitting there eating. I mean, this was a full-on meal, and he was telling stories about his life living in Alaska, that kind of thing. So then we got back on the bus, and we made our way back through town, more stories. Oh, and then we stopped at an overlook where that was up pretty high up in the mountains, and you could get a whole bunch of really great pictures of the town, of mountains. We could see the port, so we could see the Disney ship there along with the other ships and take pictures and that kind of thing. Then we made our way back into town, and we stopped at the Red Onion Saloon, and we heard stories about the Red Onion Saloon. And then we went up to the brothel. They did give us champagne, and they told us all of the stories about all of the business undertakings that happened upstairs and how all of that worked. And then we made our way back to the ship. This was 7 hours long is what it's billed as. It actually ended up being more than that. I know I was sitting outside the ship still at 7:30. And I actually sat outside for a little bit and just hung out for a little while and made my way back on the ship. It was 8 o'clock, and we had our dinner time was 8:15 or 8:30. We had the second seating. So take that into consideration if you are planning which seating to choose for Alaska, that it is highly desirable to choose the second seating rather than main dining if you are going to be doing a lot of excursions in Alaska, because a lot of these do actually run later into the afternoon. But overall, I enjoyed this tremendously because I got to knock out all of these typical Alaska things, and I didn't want to necessarily this was our very first port. I knew I was going to be by myself, so I didn't necessarily want to wander around town by myself because I didn't have that experience. I didn't know how I would feel about it. So this made me feel like safe and taken care of, and I got to have a ton of experiences, and I had a really, really, really great day, and I felt like it was a good value.
Well, you mentioned the length of the day. Skagway's the longest port, typically, unless something happens. But we were there from, I think, 7:30 to 8 o'clock that day. So a very long day. You have time to knock off 2 excursions, depending on how, it's
How you time
set
it.
up. And Rhino and I did time it for that. And so we did a second excursion that I don't have a lot to say about because I don't recommend it at all. We did the Mushers Camp and Sled Dog Experience. SW24. It was $183 for adults, $152 for kids. And
I've done that one too.
I hated this. I've done the sled dog experience before, not on snow, like on their training carts on a previous Alaskan cruise, and it was wonderful. I confirmed with my parents on that one. It was a mile out and a mile back, so it was a nice long experience with the dogs and got to see so many dogs. With Rhino and I, we got driven out on a 40-minute bus ride to what looked like a rundown, abandoned amusement park out of the movie Nope, almost. And we boarded a second vehicle that took us higher up into the mountains, dropped us off by the dog carts. We boarded the dog carts. We went around in 2 circles, could not have gone more than about a quarter mile total
I think it was
distance.
less than that, yeah.
And it was and then we got off the carts. We got to pet the dogs for 5 minutes, got on the other vehicle, went back down, saw some lab puppies.
No, we stopped at an overlook place for just like quick, like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then went down and saw the puppies. Yeah.
And they weren't they weren't husky puppies. There was 2 huskies in that mix, but they were older ones. And then the rest were all just like lab mixes and such. I'm pretty sure they brought them in just because they have to have puppies as part of it, even though they didn't have the right kind. And we were there for an uncomfortable amount of time, like 30 minutes. And then finally they took us back down to the bus and 40 minutes back to the port. It felt overly long. It felt like it was all this time getting to dogs for very little dog interaction. And the kids that were in our group seemed very excited. I thought the dogs it was so underwhelming. I felt bad for the dogs.
Yeah.
Even though they want to run and that is part of it, that's their training. They want to, like, they're born to only want to do this, but it was not a camp that I felt good about supporting.
It was like when you go to one of those zoos where you're like, and it just makes you feel that way, where you're like, no,
Yeah.
I shouldn't have participated in this.
It's
And
no
that's
Animal
exactly how I
Kingdom.
felt. Yeah.
It wasn't at all. And that's where like the downside is. We did have a couple hours in the middle of the day in the town to see a little bit more of it and eat. I would have rather skipped the night excursion, ate somewhere downtown, like at Skagway Brewery, and then skip dinner back on the ship. Because when you pull out of Skagway, you will see the most gorgeous sunset, the most beautiful landscapes. And when you're sitting in a Disney restaurant cut off from the rest of the world, you're missing out on all that behind you. So I would recommend grabbing dinner in Skagway and then skipping it on the ship. Just my opinion, though.
Okay. And like I said, I did jewelry shopping. I promised
The
myself.
Diamonds International Tour.
Yeah, really. Which I don't recommend Diamonds International.
Ah,
I have had problems with the stuff I bought there. I have to take stuff to get fixed.
every class.
Every clasp on every bracelet and necklace has not worked right. But I do recommend, if you're doing jewelry shopping in any of these ports, including in the Caribbean, Miners Gems. Miners Gems. I bought a lot of stuff from them. They're really good, really good. But not on this trip. On my last one, I did an excursion called Jewel Gardens, which is really nice, a really nice garden, but it's also a glass blowing factory. And they do a glass blowing demonstration and then allow you to create your own ornament. And they'll send it to you, they'll ship it to you, and because it's got to like cool and all this other stuff's got to be done. But it was a really cool excursion. I was trying to look up the price on it, but of course Disney Cruise Line's website is down because it's Disney Cruise Line. So I can't tell you what it wasn't an expensive excursion at all. And it had a really cute shop there. But Jewel Gardens, if you want something simple and nice, definitely family friendly, that's not expensive. But I also did the dog sled camp a few years ago, except they had huskies. They had baby huskies. But I remember feeling really sad for those dogs. Really, really sad for those dogs. Because it was like, as Craig described it,
Yeah.
It's kind of like a puppy tenement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other ones I went to in Skagway, but further up into Canada, wonderful places. So I would just research to see pictures of the area. If you're one of those people that feels bad for animals in those situations, maybe look at it, because this one was not good.
Yeah. So, all right, folks, that is going to do it for our look at Skagway. And that'll do it for this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you again next week with another episode of the DCL Show. Have a great week, everyone.